I am Sharon Howard. I am a proud member of the class of 1978 at the University of Dayton and a member of the board of directors of the Alumni Association. What a treat we have for you today. You are going to have a blast. Thank you for joining us and congratulations to everyone on today's webinar who are celebrating a reunion year. Before we begin, I'd like to share a few housekeeping notes with you. The session will be recorded and available on UDigital. There will be an opportunity at the end of the Q&As for you to ask any questions you may have. So we are going to try to get to as many as we can, but I know that you're excited to hear from our panelists today. To talk about excitement, I am one excited and honored person to have been asked to moderate today's gathering with these three great University of Dayton presidents, all of whom I consider friends. They are remarkable leaders who model what it means to use your faith to serve others. Today is a rare and special opportunity. While they've posed for photos together, this is the first time they've gathered together in a room. Well, it's a Zoom room, but a room all the same. And they are here to talk about how they have shepherded UD through changing times without losing the one thing that will never change. Each has worked to strengthen UD's strong Catholic Marianist identity and sense of community we all treasure. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you and welcome, first up, President Eric F. Spina. Dr. Spina is still creating his legacy. He finishes up his 5th year on July 1, after being named the 19th president in 2016. He is leading UD through a pandemic while diversifying the campus and solidifying the university's reputation as an anchor university with the Dayton Arcade and On Main initiatives. Dr. Dan Curran served 14 years from 2002 to 2016. He was the first lay leader and dramatically expanded UD's footprint with the purchase of the NCR properties. And Brother Ray Fitz, who is the longest serving president in school history. He stepped down in 2002 after a remarkable 23-year tenure. The university became highly residential with the purchase of houses in the student neighborhoods. UD preeminence as a national Catholic university took hold during his era. Each in his own way read the signs of the times and acted. Let's begin today's session with some rapid fire questions to get us all started. And I'm going to start with you, Brother Ray. Favorite place on campus?
I have two of them. One is the chapel, which is where I do my Sunday worship, and then living in the student neighborhood has been a great joy for me.
Awesome. Dr. Dan?
I knew Ray was going to say the chapel, and chapel ranks high for me too. But I would say the mall area and the development of the residential community that we did early in my presidency. I think the mall made a significant difference and really became the heart of the university in a way.
Dr. Spina.
I'm gonna say that the chapel as well. Thanks to Dr. Dan and Father Jim for getting that renovated just in time for me. So I love being there with students and community members. But then I'll add on Serenity Pines, which is a really special place.
Dr. Spina, since I have you here, I'm going to start with you. Favorite catering or dining hall food or meal?
Well, I'm going to give you two again. So now that there's a president's residence, we get to eat a lot of great meals from catering, and their chicken Caesar is right at the top of the list. But then when I think about going to the residence halls, the Mongolian grill at VWK is first rate.
Dr. Dan.
Okay, my favorite food. Okay, here we go. Dan Curran. Lemon meringue pie and iced tea.
Okay, those go together like birds and a feather. Okay.
That's right. That's right. And anywhere, I would like to eat anywhere on campus.
Brother Ray, what's your favorite dining hall food or meal?
I don't know about dining hall food. I think everything's pretty good. I really like to be in the faculty staff dining room when I was president. you got to hear things you wouldn't hear any other way.
And some of them good, Brother Ray.
Brother Ray, let me ask you, I mean, I've already said that you're the longest serving president in school history. So this might be a bit hard for you, but give me a best memory.
Well, when I thought about that, Sharon, I thought about all the graduates that I know. And what I've been so proud of is how they are serving the common good. I mean, that every time I communicate with them, it's very, very exciting.
Dr. Dan, best memory.
I'm very similar to Ray again. I think every graduation was a great time for me, and always to hear what the students have done. I think my son graduating was especially significant for me. But you know, it really, the graduations were such a great moment as you're up there shaking hands. Or I know Eric had to give an elbow this year or whatever. But the fact is, you know, that's really what you're there for, and really gives you the greatest joy.
Dr. Spina, I hope I'm not going to steal your best memory, but when listening to Dr. Dan and Brother Ray talk about graduation, my memory of you is taking a selfie with the entire graduating class behind you. What's your best memory?
Yeah, so I mean, these guys are killing me. So I was gonna say, really, every commencement, it's what we're about. But just to be a little bit different, I'll actually call out this year's commencement, when you know, really after a year of uncertainty, to actually be mostly together and to allow each graduate to have 4 guests. There's something really special about this year's commencement.
Okay, so I'm serving you notice, all 3 of you. Your favorite reunion class, and don't forget who your moderator is. Just ask him. Dr. Spina?
I plead the 5th Amendment.
Come on. That was too easy. That was too easy.
Absolutely. I'm not touching that one.
Dr. Dan, will you tip your toe in the deep end of the pool?
No, my phone isn't muted. No, I'm with Eric. I think everyone, you know, clearly the class of '78 was a very significant class. But when you get on campus with the students during reunion weekend, it's unfortunate that they can't be there this year and last year. It doesn't matter the class. When you walk up and see them, it's the common community that's been established all over year after year after year. I guess for me, especially the students who graduated when I was there, like you, when I was president.
Thank you, Dr. Dan. Brother Ray?
Yeah, this will be a little odd, but my first reunion was when my dad should have celebrated his 40th anniversary from graduating from UD. So it was the very first one in '79. And I think what was so memorable about that was that I got to meet many of his friends, and I got a really warm welcome as my first year as president. So that's one that stuck with me.
Brother Ray, I'm going to start getting into some of our deeper questions, and it seems fitting that I start with you on this question, and that is, what does it mean to you to be a steward of our Catholic Marianist identity? I'm sure that you have some really inspiring words to answer to that question.
Well, when I was thinking about that question, Sharon, I come up with a pretty short answer. So I hope I don't disappoint people on this. But I think the way we focused the mission and identity was to engage our faculty and staff in conversations about it. And I think the constant involvement, making sure they had good resource persons to help those conversations and good reading materials, I think really stimulated. So I felt during the years, and I think both Dan and Eric have continued that, engaging faculty, what is our mission? What's our purpose? Why is it important for us? And I think that's really what sustained us.
Dr. Dan, I mentioned earlier, you're the first lay president. So how did you approach that during your tenure in terms of making sure that the Catholic Marianist identity was always at the center of everything that we did at UD?
Well, first of all, since I came from a Jesuit institution, I had to be totally retrained. And I spent a lot of time with the Marianists, and, you know, reading the works of Father Ferry, And Dave Fleming also, when he was the Superior General, wrote some very interesting stuff about missionary educator. And I thought that was very informative. And then when I came in, and this will be echoing Ray again, I think that the three universities, University One, and Ray was the director of the Association of Marianist Universities. And we established the Marianist Educational Associates, and it was to do what they said, to make sure that faculty, staff had a better connection, and actually was giving them more responsibility in nurturing the mission of the institution. And again, there's many other little things, you know, Eric referenced the chapel. I thought the chapel was an important thing to do at that point for everyone. But I really think the MEAs, if I had to point to one thing during my tenure, and working with Ray and Bernie Plager on that, was really a good initial first year, second year experience for me.
And Eric, how do you continue to maintain this through your presidency?
Yeah, so I'm in a unique situation. So Dan had, obviously Brother Ray had been at Catholic University for a long time, and same with Dr. Dan. I had gone to Catholic school for 12 years through high school, but then had worked at private secular institutions. So when I came here, I really had a lot to learn just about being at a Catholic university, much less leading one. And this is where really, you know, I knew that it was an important part of my role, that it wasn't just an educational institution, that it's a Catholic educational institution, and not just a Catholic educational institution, a Catholic and Marianist one. So I really, you know, I think I was smart enough to know I had a lot to learn. So, you know, frankly, I spent a lot of time talking to Dan early in the transition, spent a lot of time, and still do, sitting with Brother Ray. But then I think about, you know, Father Jim Fitz and Brother Tom Giordano and Father Marty Solma, who was the provincial at the time. It really helped me, were very patient with me, and I tried to listen very carefully. But then ultimately, what really cinched it for me, you know, understanding really the nature of our university, was watching the faculty and staff in action with each other, how they cared for students, how they thought about vocation. And that really kind of helped me understand what I had to do as president to make certain that we maintained really our Catholic nature and our Marianist values. And really, you know, I continued to learn, but I try to reflect, you know, the many people who give me advice and perspective.
I just want to remind everyone on the webinar today, you have a question, please feel free to drop it in the Q&A part, type it in that feature, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. Brother Ray, let me go back to you. I continue even today to be amazed at the number of young people who want to come to the University of Dayton from all over the country. How did you manage the enrollment growth during your presidency?
Yeah, very good question. I think that the first thing that was important was to get University of Dayton known as a Catholic Marianist University more than just in the Ohio region. So trying to get a Midwest, at least, or national profile for the university. I think we had an excellent admission staff with Tom Ferricks and Jim Hoover. We're kind of athletic people, but they really knew how to get out and recruit. And there was a bunch of young Turks in the admission staff that just worked really, really hard to be out there present. And so we did have good recruiting. But I think our big secret is when people got to know our faculty and staff on the campus, they were just, I think, very impressed with the quality of education and the kind of sense of family spirit that was here on the campus. And then I do think the one thing, and Dan alluded to this, the ability to be able to develop the student neighborhood as a community. I think that really made a difference.
Thank you. Dr. Curran, I'm born and raised in Dayton, Ohio. So I remember when NCR had a huge footprint all around that Main Street area, all the way to the river. I remember all of that. And then I remember when they announced that they were leaving, and there was this huge concern about what was going to happen to that beautiful property. And then I remember the sense of pride that I had to find out that that the university was going to take that whole land on and redevelop it into something amazing. Talk about how you grew that footprint of the university with the purchase of NCR, and what was your vision for it?
Before I say that, I want to point one thing out. Ray, this was like a continuation of some of the things Ray was doing. You know, Ray, he cleverly acquired so many houses in the student neighborhood, covertly, I might add, in many cases. And that really stabilized the university. And then the fairgrounds project really was fascinating to get that neighborhood and work with outside groups to make that happen. But the NCR property was really a two-phase process. And I have to say that during my interview as president, no one mentioned the NCR property, but as soon as I got on campus, everybody said, you have to get the NCR property. I had to really get up to speed with what it was all about. But it was really a two-step process. So we bought the first area to the river. And actually that was a very challenging negotiation. And because of environmental concerns, and we just had some great outside champions. We had, I remember Representative Hobson from Springfield played a major role. So at the federal level, he did things for us, including remediation. He actually went and talked to the president of NCR. Actually, we broke off negotiations, and then he brought the two of us together. We did not want to take the environmental responsibility. And so that acquisition was tough. The second one was relatively easy, the acquisition of the NCR World Headquarters, for a lot of reasons. One was we just had a great team at the university. And if there's one person I have to call out for just being, hanging in there and working so hard, it was Tom Burkhart, the financial vice president at that time. And we had a lot of champions in the community. So at that time you had like JP and Steve for the Dayton Development Coalition, and he's now at Jobs Ohio. But Burkhart and the team around him, Beth Keys, just worked and worked and worked. And really, the people who from Dayton who were in NCR wanted the property to go to UD. They knew UD would be a good steward, and that's, they knew what Ray had done. They knew where we were going. But probably one of the funniest things was I would always be getting on Burkhart's case. And some of you have heard the story before. And Burkhart comes in one day and says, what do you want me to do? I'm going to go negotiate right now. I said, I want all the furniture in that building too. And he says, oh, you're going to make me ask for the furniture? I said, get the furniture. And he comes back like 2 hours later and he goes, Dan, I not only got the furniture, I got the lawnmowers. He had gotten everything from them. I mean, it was amazing what he did. But, Burkhart, Beth Keys, that whole team, it was a team. And I put on the team the people who were at NCR who knew it was the right thing to do and knew that we would take care of it. I was stunned at the community's reaction. It was like we came in on the white horse and just swept it up, and it just worked out so well. The interesting thing is most people focus on the land. The land wasn't the great deal. It was, we just acquired almost 1 million square feet of property for probably less than $50 a square foot. 50, I guess, or $200, $300 a square foot now to build. I mean, it was a huge deal. And I mean, the land is great, but really, if you look at Fitz Hall and that other guy's hall now that we used to be the NCR World Headquarters, that was the deal. The property is beautiful, but the deal was we didn't have to spend money on building on campus, and we could remove the research center from the engineering building. We could move the arts into one building. It was transformative in that way, the way we used the space. So it was a lot of fun, but it really was all the people working with me. And again, I have to tip my hat to Tom Burkhart, Beth Keys. They were just great people. And again, really a pleasure, a joy to work with.
I don't know what we would do without those 1 million square feet, Dan, really. I have no idea what we'd do.
Oh, it would be it would be really difficult. That's transformational. Just like when Ray bought all those houses, or who was it, Bernie that bought the houses, Ray, or were you
That
saying
was Bernie.
It was Bernie. There's always the guy, the person behind you, you know, he or she doing something special. But yeah, it was a team effort, you know, and again, with federal and state assistance, it was able to happen.
Well, Eric, you know, when I think of, when I look at your work, since you've been here, the one word that pops into my head is partnerships. And even though you believe that my full-time job is working for the university, I kind of am really responsible as a team member for Premier Health. And so we see firsthand some of those partnerships. So share a little bit about your vision of UD's expansion into the community with the On Main project and the arcade.
Yeah, and thanks for the question, Sharon. So I'm going to say, you know, leaving Syracuse, which, you know, the chancellor at the time was really very focused on community university partnerships. If I was going to be a president, I wanted to be a place where the community and the university were in sync. I saw what Dan had done. I learned what Brother Ray had done. I thought, you know, this is the kind of place that really, plus the Marinus charism and the notion of building a community. I said, this is the place for me. So for me, I mean, really kind of the engagement with the community is it's kind of two different things coming together. So the first is, to your point, we are an anchor institution here in Dayton, and we're a partnership university. You know, the name of the city is in our name, right? We're not about to move down to Georgia. We're not about to move anywhere else. We are here for keeps. So what happens here is really important to us. As we think about, you know, what's happened to the city of Dayton in terms of losing jobs over the last 30 or so years, the University of Dayton, you know, if we're going to attract students, we're going to attract good faculty and staff, we need to be part of the solution for Dayton. So as an anchor, it's incumbent upon us to do what we can to make certain that Dayton remains strong. And that's kind of a selfish thing, but it's also obviously good for the community. And then the piece of this is student learning. I firmly believe, you know, we have great faculty and staff who really, you know, provide an incredible education for students in the classroom, but engaged learning, publicly engaged learning is really important for our students. So getting them out of the classroom into the community, working with people different than themselves can make them better leaders, can help them work in more diverse environments than they otherwise would be able to. So, you know, engaging in the community allows our students even more opportunities. So when we think about how to bring together all of our entrepreneurship and innovation and creativity activities, we could have done that on campus, but better to do it in the community at a place like the arcade, where our students can engage with many different kinds of people from other universities, from business, from you name it. And that really, for me and the team here working together, kind of has driven us. You know, the notion, let's be an anchor institution that builds Dayton, but also one that creates opportunity for our students. I mean, that's my fiduciary responsibility. If I'm doing something in the community that doesn't ultimately benefit our students, then shame on me. So, you know, when we saw the University of Dayton for the first time on Main Street down on the arcade building, it was a proud moment because we're contributing to the city, but we're also creating opportunities for our students, which is what we're thinking about.
All right, well, as I mentioned, there are some people who are putting questions in the Q&A feature today, but we had lots of people who submitted questions in advance, and I'm going to jump around and try to get to as many as I can and trying to pick those ones that I think have really great impact. I'm going to start with you, Brother Ray. Is there one situation that you regret, and what did you learn from that, and how did it impact your leadership moving forward?
I can remember very clearly, it was in my second or third year as president. We had an outside legal counsel, and the outside legal counsel, in consultation with our human resources people, said I had to let somebody go. And I did that. But in retrospect, I didn't think it was a great decision. And I had to remind myself, the lawyer is a legal counsel and I'm responsible for the decision. So that, I think that was a lesson I learned pretty early on in the process.
Dan, any situation you regret, and what did you learn from it moving forward?
Say regret, I'll say I felt bad about some decisions after that I had to make. I think I was always guided by the rule that the top priority was having an institutional perspective. And people could give you, criticisms, and I always felt if they were well-intended and trying to make the university better, that's fine. We're moving ahead. We need to have dialogue. So I think there were times where I had to take steps like Ray, but I felt that, if it was a personnel decision and the person wasn't working for the best of the institution, was say more self-centered, you had to make that move. At times I was personally very sad about these decisions, but I knew it had to be done. I think those personnel decisions are always very difficult. The other thing is always, if I want to say situations that I regret, I was always very, the loss of a student is probably the most difficult thing, was the most difficult thing for me to handle. I'm sure that's true with Ray and Eric. You really have a sense that you're almost, they came there and you had to take care of them. So the loss of a student really was probably the thing that would get to me the most. And you would always think how you could have avoided it, what you could have done. But in most cases, you're so far removed from the situation, but it just hurts. It just hurts. They're part of your community.
Eric, I'm going to ask you in a little different way. Has there been a situation during your tenure, something that you've lost sleep over?
Let's see, the last 16 months, almost every day. No, I mean, I would just point to the pandemic. I mean, beyond, so I think Dan identifies something really critical that the three of us certainly agree on. Losing a student is just, it's crushing for the institution, right? It's our responsibility to support them and take care of them. And sometimes you just can't do anything, but we feel it. But beyond that, really, Sharon, I would just point to the last 16 months. I mean, obviously getting better recently, but there were a series of decisions that had to be made, right? Prioritizing the institution overall and our mission and our identity and our people and our people's health. We did a lot of things as a team that were really hard. And so I'd say a lot of nights kind of tossing and turning and, in situations where we didn't have a lot of information, are we doing the right thing? And there were many times where we just were not certain.
And really,
Sharon, let me just make a real quick comment here.
Sure.
I think Eric and his team have done an outstanding job of leading the university during this period of time. I've been amazed how well they've done, and he's put a great team to move us forward during this time.
Thanks, Brother Ray.
Absolutely. And we're really talking about leadership. And I guess one question that I would have beyond these is, okay, so you're confronted with a difficult decision. Is there a particular strategy that you use when you're faced with a difficult decision? Is there a certain person that you consult with or a certain step that you take that moves you forward? I'm just looking at strategy.
Yeah.
I'll start with you, Eric.
Yeah, so I point to two things. One is, I understand for this university where I'm blessed to be, mission and identity are so important, right? So that's always front of mind, right? What's our identity? What's our mission? And how can we make decisions that are true to those? And then the second thing, I mean, I know I'm very rarely the smartest person in the room. I'm really, really proud of our two executive vice presidents and our vice presidents. I'm blessed to have a great team. I know that in their respective areas, they have the information, they have the knowledge, and I really try to rely on those as much as I can. And they'll tell you, sometimes I question, and sometimes I substitute my judgment or attempt to. But I'm blessed with a great team, and I really lean into them and really respect what they provide to me and to the institution.
Dan, what strategy did you always use? Who did you consult?
No, I'll echo again something that Eric said. I think the first 5 years of my presidency, I had the same, some of them were interim vice presidents when Ray left. I think the five key people in the cabinet were with me for 5 years. So Brother Ray set me up pretty well with very good people. So I think in the room you're sitting there, and I think the key role for a president or anyone in a leadership role, especially in crisis times, is to be the person who steadies the ship, who has a sense of humor, keep people light, keep things moving. There are people, always as a person or two on your staff to get extremely uptight. How do you keep that person functioning at full capacity? Making decisions, keeping them in the team, not veering off. So I think it's having a good team, doing team maintenance, and recognizing where some people are feeling challenged and give them the appropriate support. And I also think it's important to have a good sense of humor and be able to say, hey, lighten up, we're going to be fine. We're going to move forward. And I think I was always, many times I was a little too aggressive for the team. And there was a lot of people that would say, come back. And like Eric said, there's times you say, now we're going in this direction, but it's really about team leadership and team maintenance. And I think all three of us, Ray left a great team of people. And I know the two executive vice presidents that Eric has now were people who were, in my cabinet, and it creates a flow of continuity in the institution too. So that's where I'm coming up from this. You have to play a role not only as making decisions, but maintaining the team.
Brother Ray, let me switch gears a little bit because you have this long view of history, but still being so connected to the university. What is your personal hope for the Marianist presence on campus into the future?
I believe Dan mentioned one of the things that I think is going to be an extremely important strategy, and that is the formation of Marianist educational associates, and really helping lay people on the campus, faculty, staff, work to understand our Marianist charism and be able to animate it through the work that they're doing. We're doing that at all three universities, and I think it's been a great initiative. I can't tell you how excited I'm here when I see the way people have grabbed hold of our educational tradition and really organized it and implemented it. When you have people that can speak to it, it really makes a difference on the campus. So I think that strategy has been really important. And I believe, the church is faced with a crisis that we're going to have to raise up lay leadership, and that's extremely important. And I do think if the university is going to have a strong Catholic Marianist presence, yes, the Marianists will play a role, but will really need to be supplemented by a strong cadre of lay leadership that really buys into the educational tradition and to the charism.
Dan, if you had the opportunity to ask one question of Blessed Father William Joseph Chaminade, what would that be, and how do you imagine he would answer?
I'm not going to bring up my question for Father Chaminade. I don't want to go there. Let me say, I would rather ask Father Meyer a question.
Okay.
I think Father Meyer coming to the United States, to read some of his letters and correspondence, he had this great desire to come to the New World and to expand the mission of the Society of Mary. And again, coming from the German-speaking section of France, he came, at the request of the Jesuits who were in Cincinnati. And obviously the Jesuits were asking the Marianists to help them because the Marianists were better teachers. And that's the way it's always been. So I'm joking, everybody. I'm just joking. But, what drove him to want to come here and be in the United States. And then it's curious that we realized that, our institution, when it was a school for boys, it was an institution established by immigrants. And how does that play in the tradition of today, what we need to do today with immigrants? So it would be fascinating to talk to Meyer. And then again, if you look in Marinus history, where did they go after that? They went to Texas, they went to Hawaii, they went to they went to Japan, they went to China. But really, I think when you go to Meyer, he's the key one. So I'll keep my question for Father Shamana until I see him. And then I will ask Father Meyer. So I think Meyer's a key person in the history of the University of Dayton.
Well, Eric, I can't have you here and not talk about what you think that the future of UD is going to look like. So where do you see UD going in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, so Sharon, when people ask me, beginning in my second year through today, kind of what's my vision for the future of the University of Dayton? I mean, my answer is pretty straightforward. I want us to be the best possible version of ourselves, right? So we've already talked about our mission, our identity, our values, talking about our priorities as a university. This isn't about us trying to become someone else. We want to be the best University of Dayton we can be. So, continuing to make progress on key areas. You referenced before, made a lot of progress in terms of socioeconomic and racial diversity on campus. We have a lot more to do. Need to do a lot more in terms of fundraising. Right? Our endowment relative to other universities, our size and our quality is really quite poor. So we need to focus some efforts there. We need to make certain we continue to support our faculty and staff who are delivering extraordinary academic programs, extraordinary experiential learning opportunities. We need to make certain that we are staying on the cutting edge and continuing to push those things forward. So this isn't about us trying to become something different. It's executing as best we can who we are and continuing to have the impact locally, but also give students really the opportunity to pursue their vocation and then go do great things in the world where they can really have an impact. So, this is not a revolutionary vision, but it's who we are, and the university now over 170 years really has had a huge impact locally and across the country, and in some cases around the world. The world needs us, the country needs us. We need to make sure we're still here, sustainable, and delivering on the promise that is a Catholic Marianist education.
Can the university continue to grow, but yet keep the characteristics that make UD UD?
So we can continue to grow in our impact. Just size-wise, I think we're as large as we want to be, certainly at the undergraduate level. I mean, that number may actually come down in the coming years as we look to optimize what we're doing as a university, creating the best possible learning experience for students. So I don't think we're going to continue to grow at the undergraduate level. That doesn't mean we can't grow in impact, and that's really our focus.
Brother Ray, let me ask you a question. This came from one of our attendees today, and it's a great question. What advice would you give yourself in your first year as president?
Well, I think the thing that really helped me, and I probably wish I did it better, was listening to people. So I think I learned a lot from, the interesting thing is I was 39 years old when I came in. Every dean and every vice president was 10 years older than I was. And I had a board of trustees that was as frisky as could be. And so just being able to listen to that group of people and to learn from them was probably the thing that helped me the most. So I think, just learning to listen to people, but have your own convictions, your own judgments that you can use in that process. So I think dialogue was my best experience.
Dr. Dan, what advice would you give yourself in your first year?
Maybe slow down a little. I think I came and was ready to roll. I had a good chance. I mean, I talked to Ray quite a bit, and you know, I had a sense of what was going on. I have to, you know, if there's any problems with me, I'm going to blame it on Ray, because he's the one that talked me into really applying to be the president of the University of Dayton. Ray really was spectacular. It was like a pre-application interview I did with Ray. I think there was a necessity to do certain things. I could have waited. I didn't want to wait, but I could have been more accommodating to people to understand why we had to do things differently. That really the future of the university depended on making shifts. And again, there was, I tend to be a little more aggressive in some ways than the majority of people. You know, but it was great. I always felt I had Ray if I had to call. And at the same time, Ray, you know, kept his distance from things. But you know, you always knew you had him there, and he could be wise counsel if you needed him. So
Well, I'm glad you said that, because I have a follow-up question to you, Dr. Dan. Can you give me probably some of the best advice that you ever got from Brother Ray?
well, he told me if there was one person I should avoid, it was Sharon Howard.
See, that's okay. I will get you for that. You know that.
No, I'll tell you one thing, and this is interesting. Someone brought up about being the first lay president. Ray and I went around together. There were probably about 4 people who were very, very concerned about having a lay president. And Ray went with me to meet those people. Okay. And there were some fascinating people, you know, people with charts drawn when we got into the room. But, you know, going together was just a wonderful, wonderful thing, and created a real good bond. And in my first year was you know, all those things, the board was great. Eric has a great board. I mean, when I came in, they just said, be bold. And that played into what I was doing. And I felt, you know, the advantage I had over that Eric didn't have was the Catholic background. Excuse me, the Catholic educational background. Eric caught up fast. Eric, I thought we did a great transition. Eric had a lot of time to be here. And I think it made everything easier in a way. You know, people knew Eric, he could hit the ground running. And so transitions are always very important, and legacies are passed. And I always felt I was building on Ray's legacy and did the great things that Ray was doing. So, I mean, we have a great history as an institution. And I forget the number Terry presented the other day, the number of the 3 of us have been president for how many presidents? For 40?
A long time, a really long time.
I think the average presidency is 6 years, 5 years. It's going down fast, it's biting the dust, you know. So again, I think the legacy and the support, even if you're in Philadelphia, is there, and that's I think why we're successful.
Well, Eric, let me quickly get you in here before we start to wrap up. What is some of the best advice you got from your predecessor, Dr. Dan?
Yeah, so before I answer that, I'm just going to tee off of what Dan said. You know, I think each of us, obviously very different presidents at different times in the institution, right? And this is one of the values of, you know, every 10 or 23 years, as the case may be, having a new president. Because, you know, each person has their own set of skills, and the university is facing different challenges at that moment. I wouldn't be able to do the things that I'm doing if Dan hadn't taken care of some of the things that I don't have to worry about. And similarly with Brother Ray. But I think what's nice here is the continuity between the 3 of us. I mean, we think about the university, its mission, its identity, its relationship to the city in very similar ways. You know, we're going to approach things a little bit differently. We have different priorities in the moment. But there's a continuity that I think really has strengthened the institution. As far as kind of the transition for me, I think Dan touched on it. I was blessed. You know, my son was a senior in high school, so I stayed in Syracuse. I think I was hired in July, and I didn't start until the next September. I didn't start until the next July. And Dan was so gracious, allowed me to come and go as I pleased. working with vice presidents that I was going to have, that I inherited from Dan. And we had several open positions that Dan helped me search for, so that on day one, I had a new vice president for advancement, a new vice president for diversity inclusion. The interim provost would become a permanent provost. So kind of the support that Dan gave me, and the access and the support and advice during that 9-10 month period was really critical. Allowed me on day one to say, yeah, I don't know everything, but I know the landscape. I don't see any fires. There are things that I don't need to urgently take care of, but can really spend the time listening and engaging with people.
Okay, so before we wrap up very quickly, I'm going to start with you, Brother Ray. Proudest moment. Proudest moment.
Boy, that's a tough one. But I think that our movement of our students to experiential learning in the community has been something I've been very proud of. It's under Dan and under Eric, it has really increased. And so the movement, to the west side of Dayton, to the arcade is showing that learning takes place not just in our classrooms, but interaction with the community.
Dr. Dan, proudest.
I didn't have a single thing. I always was proudest when students, did special things like, service, like Ray said. And then faculty did amazing things. I think I got the most, out of that. And my whole experience, at UD was a joyful time. I mean, we had some challenges, but we pushed right through them. But I mean, it really gets down to what your community is doing, how you're enabling other people to do what they want to do and make a contribution to society.
And Eric, so far?
Yes, I'm going to give you two quick. I already touched on one. I think the way as a community we tackled the pandemic. Again, we're not quite out of it, but there's no way that one person or just the cabinet could do this alone. It really was a community that came together, worked together, prioritized, made good decisions, did what it had to do, from students to faculty to staff to trustees. And then the individual kind of proudest moment. So we have something called the Flyer Promise program here. The first cohort came in 4 years ago. I was blessed in 2 days before graduation to stand in front of 41 of the original 43 cohort of 43, each of whom was graduated. So a 95% graduation rate of students, came from marginalized backgrounds, kind of under-resourced schools, first generation. And to see 41 of those 43 kids supported by the university graduate in 4 years is a very emotional moment, knowing that the university had worked together, not just to change the life of these 41 kids, but to really change the arc for their families. So for me, that's kind of the single proudest moment of what the university was able to do. And now we're about to bring in our 5th cohort of Flyer Promise students. So
could not agree with you more. Well, let me just say, this has been an amazing hour. I so appreciate each of you agreeing to do this. I can't even believe we found a common date and time to be able to do it. But I would just like to thank each of you, Brother Ray, Dr. Dan Curran, and Eric Spina, all of you for your leadership and your unique and bold contributions that you've made to the university. I want to also say to the audience, thank you for joining us. Hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. For upcoming reunion events, we invite all of you to explore reunion.udayton.edu. This recording, along with other event recordings, will be posted there as well throughout the week. So I appreciate you all coming today. Thank you all. Thank you to my university for the opportunity to serve as your moderator today. Hope everybody has a great rest of the day. And as always, go Flyers.
thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, Sharon.
Thank you, guys. You were great.